Welcome to Seminar 6 in our History of Philosophy class. Today we're going to talk about the great mystery and its revival, Transcendental Phenomenology and the Existential Interpretation of Man. Okay? Hi. And the timeline is from Edmund Husserl to the Existentialists, which would be Martin Heidegger and Jean-Paul Sartre. Of course, the materials are available. I downloaded them this morning, so you'll have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation if you'd like to download that. Do we need to go out and take a look at the website, or is everybody pretty good with that? Okay, good. Scheduling note. We're now taking a month off. Okay, so it will be a month until it meets again on November 26th. And they do that because they just needed this space for either one-time seminars or maybe two-time seminars that need to have this many people and to be able to see this many people and have the overhead projectors. Okay, so we won't meet again for a month until the end of November, November 26th. All right. Here is just a quick outline of everything that we've basically discussed up till this point. So we've talked about the ancient mystery religions, the pre-Socratics, which would have been Heraclitus, Pythagoras, the ancient Greeks, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. The Gnostics, we took a look at the Mandaeans and their interpretation of the way that the universe operates, their cosmology. We talked about the early Christians. Then we fast-forwarded to Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, and Berkeley, who are the four founders of modern philosophy. Descartes, of course, being the first person in modern times to scientifically begin to take a look at the distinction between the thinking substance and the extended substance. Spinoza, Leibniz, and Berkeley responding to Descartes and attempting to evaluate and extend his ideas or sometimes criticize them and come up with their own interpretations. We then talked about David Hume and Immanuel Kant, who are, again, responding to Descartes. Hume is the skeptic. He was the one who said we really can't prove causality or most of the other things that we believe are true. We simply believe that they are true because it is a psychological necessity. Kant said this is unacceptable because if that's true, then we have no certain knowledge at all. And so we cannot talk about metaphysics, we cannot talk about ontology, we cannot talk about being, we can't talk about any of these classically important things. And so he tried to show that it wasn't just a psychological necessity, because we feel better if we have these kinds of ideas. He said it is an absolute necessary way in which the nervous system and the human person put together their experience. And so he talked about the categories of thinking, the categories of experience, and said these are given to us so that we can understand things, okay, which was a step forward. We then talked about Hegel and Nietzsche, who are now overtly political, and they're talking about the movement of history, saying that this isn't just the work of individual people who happen to be brilliant and who happen to be, talking about these issues. They are, in fact, enmeshed in an historical flow that is moving towards an endpoint. And that endpoint is global government and ultimately, a militarized police state over the entire planet. That was essentially what he said it was headed towards. Okay? And so Marx picked up on that, Engels picked up on that. They then took his ideas and made a materialist philosophy out of it. His was an idealist philosophy. And then Nietzsche came at the end of the century, and he was warning about the dangers of this, saying that if that is in fact the way that history is moving, then we as individuals need to evolve very rapidly in order to essentially combat that. He called the people who were following that particular line of history the annihilators, people who are nihilistic, people who did not believe in freedom, people who did not believe in individual rights and liberty. And he opposed those annihilators who had basically taken over the mechanisms of politics and government, to the overman, okay, who is driven by the will to power, the will to overcome him or herself, the will to evolve individually, the will to excel, the will to create, basically, is what he's talking about with the will to power. Often this is confused as an endorsement of the Hegelian and Marxist kind of historical pattern. But that's simply because people haven't read Nietzsche, or they didn't want to read Nietzsche. You know, they just wanted to pluck this out and say he is in fact supporting the Nazis, for example. Hitler was a big Nietzsche fan, and he would quote Nietzsche. He would talk about the Overman, the Superman, and the evolving species, and point to Nietzsche as a sort of a native son who was endorsing what the Nazis were doing. But in fact, Nietzsche was not talking about that. He was opposed to that from the very beginning. And so the overman is the individual spirit, the individual soul, the individual human being, who is now recognizing the nature of reality, a reality that was placed in motion at the beginning of the Western period with the ancient Greeks, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Okay, because they gave us science, and science gave us the Nazis. And so he's saying we need to go all the way back to that beginning, recognize our roots, our foundations, who and what we really are. We're spirit, and we need to evolve. We need to evolve into the overman. Because the only way the annihilators are able to get away with what they're getting away with is because most people are asleep. You talked about the herd mentality. You talked about the spirit of gravity that drags down the overman, the people who try to rise above it, to try to overcome. And he has in Thus Spake Zarathustra, he has a really interesting metaphor. Zarathustra is looking at a tightrope walker who is above the crowd. And remember, the crowd is down there wishing for the tightrope walker to fall. That is, to engage the spirit of gravity, to pull the overman off of his very tenuous lifeline and drag them back down into the herd mentality. Okay, so that was where we left it. We had an interesting discussion about eternal recurrence, where it was difficult for people to sort of engage in this meditation on what would happen if we had to repeat this particular moment an infinite number of times. Okay, so and that's the way that Nietzsche was phrasing it. Remember, he said, what if a demon were to come to you one day and whisper in your ear that this is the nature of reality, that you are condemned to repeat this moment over and over and over again an infinite number of times? How would you respond? And he says the overman would respond by amor fati, love of one's fate, engaging oneself in whatever is going on right now this minute. This is his version of the ancient myth of Sisyphus. Okay, if you recall, Sisyphus was condemned to live an eternity in Hades, rolling a huge stone up this incline. And he could almost get it to the top, but then it would roll back down. And so he'd have to walk down the incline and roll the stone back up again and again and again for infinity. So the ancient Greeks also had this notion that there was this eternal recurrence of these mundane kinds of activities. You get up, you brush your teeth, you cook breakfast, you drive the same route, you sit at the same desk, you deal with the same people, okay, over and over and over and over and over again. So to focus our attention on the fact that life isn't necessarily repetitive, the myth of Sisyphus and the doctrine of eternal recurrence were created in order to focus our attention on that and to create a sort of a moral teaching, an ethical kind of teaching. Think about this and what it means, especially if you are attempting to become the overman, if you're attempting to overcome, attempting to evolve. Notice that there's this continuous tension, a movement between over and under in Thus Spake Zarathustra. That is because this is a Gnostic myth. Remember, the Gnostic cosmology, the divine world from which we came and to which we should return, is way out there, transcendent, over. It is over and completely beyond, transcendent to this world here. This is the underworld. That is the overworld. And so we find this constant transition between over and under. At the beginning of the book, Zarathustra, who is up high in the mountains with his eagle and his snake, two ancient symbols for wisdom, decides to go under. So he climbs down the mountain. Okay? And he says, I bring the people here, the people who are not awakened yet, who are not enlightened, I bring them the overman, the doctrine of the overman, so that they can climb up to the heights and return back essentially to the divine realm. Okay? Any questions about all of that before we continue?
So where is that from that you were doing?
Nietzsche. That's from Thus Spake Zarathustra. And so it's told in a fable. It's told in a parable kind of a way. It's not your typical philosophical treatise like we've seen with Descartes and the others. This is a story. This is a narrative. It's almost like the Platonic dialogues. It's a play. It's a story. Okay, and embedded in this story is all of these ideas: the overman, the doctrine of eternal return, and the other elements that Nietzsche wanted us to pay attention to. It was the last book that was, it was the second to last book that was published. It was the last book that he wrote before he became insane. He became insane in 1890 and died in 1900. So he spent 10 years in the insane asylum. And it was because of the syphilis that had destroyed his brain. Not only the syphilis, but also the treatments. They were kind of primitive back then. They were using mercury, arsenic, other kinds of things to try to treat it. And so that, over time, leads to total neurological collapse. And that's what happened to him. Okay? Did that answer your question? Yes? Any other questions? Okay, so remember that we are tracing this single idea. The single idea that there are two substances from the very beginnings of human history all the way to the present time, and how we deal with that. Okay? Today we're going to take a look at Hans Feininger and his book, The Philosophy of As If, Edmund Husserl and his Cartesian Meditations, Ludwig Wittgenstein and his Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, Martin Heidegger's Being and Time, Sartre's Being and Nothingness, and then we'll take a look at the ancient mystery religions as they were revealed in the late 1800s through the New Age movement. Okay? We know a lot about the ancient mystery religions, even though they were secret, because the secret was passed on from those ancient times all the way to the present, and it reached a peak right around 1875. And all of these schools, all of these New Age schools, began to teach the ancient mystery religions openly. And so we have the documents that they created, which have been handed down for generations. That's how we can know so much about what the ancients were thinking, because we can actually see what they were doing. We can actually view exactly what they're doing. We'll take a look at some of the rituals. We'll take a look at some of the temple diagrams. We'll take a look at some of those things that were created by the New Agers. And that will give us an insight into what the ancients were doing. All right. Hans Feininger was born in 1852 and died in 1933. He was a Neo-Kantian scholar. He studied Kant. And he studied Kant, and of course the other philosophers, but he wrote specifically about Kant. In the book, The Philosophy of As If, here, which is a really interesting book, seriously overlooked. Most philosophy departments do not teach this. Okay? In it, he extends on an idea that first appears in Thomas Hobbes, okay, who was just a little bit after Descartes. And Hobbes talks about fictions. He talks about the creation of fictions by which we govern our reality. Now, Hume is pointing in that general direction as well. Hume comes after Hobbes. Hume is basically saying that everything we believe is a fiction, and the only reason we believe it is because it's psychologically necessary that we believe it. We act as if these fictions were true. We act as if these fictions were in fact true, when in fact we don't even know if they're true or not. Okay? And so that idea in Hobbes, which is applied mostly to social constructs, like the social contract and other kinds of theories of government, these are all fictions. They don't have any reality in the real world. Okay? People are going to go and vote on November 6th because they believe in the fiction that this vote will make a change. Because they believe in the fiction that the vote is a necessary part of being a citizen in a democratic republic. Those are all fictions. Those are all things that we have been taught to believe, but which in fact may or may not be true in the real world. Okay? So these are the kind of things that Hobbes was talking about. Now, Jeremy Bentham was a lawyer, and he said, yeah, all of the law is composed of juristic fictions. The concept of a contract, the concept of a corporation, the concept of, misdemeanors, all these things. These are all defined by whatever the people who are making the laws want them to be defined as, and they're fictions. Okay? They're fictions that are enforced at the point of the gun, but nonetheless they're fictions. They're fictions that are created and then we just act as if they were true. Okay? We don't really have to stop at a red light. We don't really have to do that. No force on the planet is compelling us to do that. Okay? If there's no traffic coming, we can in fact physically move through the intersection. We can disobey the law, the fiction. However, most of us do not. How many times have you stopped at an intersection at a red light when there's no traffic and the light just, is like out of its cycle or something? How many cycles will you sit? Even though there's no physical thing stopping you from turning or going through the intersection. Because we believe in the fiction. It has an actual psychological impact. So Bentham was talking about these juristic kind of fictions. Okay? This was published in German in 1911, and then this version was published in English in 1925. Let's just take a look at some of the fictions that organize the way that we experience the universe. Empty space is a fiction. Four-dimensional space-time is a fiction. The social contract is a fiction. Legal contracts are fictions. Causality is a fiction, the law of cause and effect. Infinity is a fiction. The Bohr atom, Niels Bohr's concept of the atom as the nucleus with orbiting electrons, sort of like a planetary model. They called it the planetary model. That was a fiction. Schrodinger's atom, which is a little bit more complex, relying on de Broglie's wave theories. So it's, instead of having the nucleus at the center and having the electrons, in definite orbits around it, it is now replaced by the cloud of the nucleus, okay, which is sort of amorphous as the neutrons and protons and whatever else happens to be there at the subatomic level are sort of moving around and changing their shape and doing all of those things. And then you have the electron clouds around them, which are only probabilistic ones. Okay, that also is a fiction. Geometric fiction, point, the line, and the angle. All of Euclid is a fiction. Euclidean geometry is a fiction. Riemannian geometry, by which Einstein developed his theory of relativity, is a fiction. However, these fictions lead to real results in our experiential world. So they're useful fictions. Okay? And science is the process of weeding out the non-useful fictions from the useful fictions. And mathematics and logic and philosophy and experimentation are the methods by which science weeds out the non-useful fictions from the useful fictions. Okay? But they're all still fictions. Fictions which we cannot prove. The only proof we have is, the results in our experiential world. But they could change at any minute, just like Hume said. So there's no proof. And so we're still sort of sitting at that point. So that's what the philosophy of as if is all talking about. Okay, questions about that? All right, so just keep in mind the phrase as if. We act and behave as if certain beliefs are true. Okay? If they are useful, then we will have useful results. If they are not useful, then we will have neurotic results. Okay? Edmund Husserl. Husserl was born in 1859 and died in 1938. he is the founder of contemporary postmodern philosophy. And he developed a system of thought called Transcendental Phenomenology based on everything that had come before him from Descartes, well, from the ancients on, but specifically referring back to Descartes. Okay, so the phenomenology is a revival and extension of Descartes' methodical skepticism. Because what had happened during the 19th century, when Husserl was, a student and when he was beginning to publish his first works as a professor, was that the situation in the universities had reverted to the same kind of sort of nonsensical situation that Descartes found. Descartes said, we're here arguing how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. This is not true philosophy. We need to get back to a grounded state where we can actually talk about what's really going on here and make some progress. He said we haven't made much progress since St. Augustine. Husserl said we haven't made much progress since Kant. Okay? And because in the 19th century there was this proliferation of what were called Weltanschauung philosophies, worldview philosophies. So basically everybody was propounding their own theory, their own fiction about what was going on. And they were not grounding it in anything that was solid. They were not grounding it in anything that could be proven. They were just out there spinning words. Okay? That's something with which we should be very familiar. Okay? Because that's a lot of what's going on out there in the larger world today. So he said we need to return to the last time when philosophy had a solid grounding. And that was Descartes' methodical skepticism. So in the Cartesian Meditations, which was published in 1931 in German and 1950 in English, he begins to talk about a method, the method of phenomenological deduction, that he has developed based on methodical skepticism. And we'll get to that in just a second. He was invited to give a 3-day lecture in English on his method. And so in 1929, he traveled to, I think it was to London, I'd have to check and see where he went, and gave his lecture and was well received in the English-speaking world. And so then he went back, he and his student, Eugen Fink, put together the manuscript and everything. It was published in 1931 and then translated in 1950 into English. Okay? And then the 6th Cartesian Meditation was a collection of discourses and conversations and papers that had remained unpublished. Eugen Fink put them together based on his stuff when he was the assistant to Husserl. And there were all of these sort of mimeographed copies running around Europe of the 6th Cartesian Meditation. There are five meditations here, okay? So there are basically 5 sections of the seminar. And the 6th Cartesian Meditation is this one here. And it comprises all of the additional materials that were never published. Fink put them together and made mimeographed copies of them and then gave them to his colleagues all across Europe. So certain people had copies of this thing, but it was never, ever published, neither in German nor English nor French nor anything else, until 1988, when it was finally translated and published in English, actually. They went back and found all of the original documentations in the Husserl archives, translated them, and then published them in that volume. Okay? Here's the method. This is the phenomenological method that is based on Descartes' methodical skepticism. Remember, Descartes said we have to doubt what we're looking at. We have to doubt what we're hearing. We have to doubt what we're feeling. We have to literally doubt it, even if it's, even if we don't want to doubt it, even if we want to assume that the fiction is true. We have to methodically doubt everything that can be doubted. So he literally, began, over 8 years, he began to apply this methodical doubt to all of his experiences. And that led him to a state of being where he was able to stand on firm, solid ground. Because the one thing he could not doubt at the end of this 8-year cycle, this 8-year meditation, was his own existence. The existence of the thinking substance which we are, which he was. Everything else can be doubted, but that cannot. Okay? So it puts the person, the thinking substance, at the center of everything. Everything else can be doubted. All knowledge can be doubted. All sense data can be doubted. All sensory experience can be doubted, but the fact that we are an existent center of consciousness cannot be doubted. So everything starts there. And then in his primary work, which was Meditations on First Philosophy, he then begins to rebuild the external world, basically. He begins to relink the thinking substance to the extended world and tries to set everything on a solid ground. Okay? So here is the updated version. Here is the new and improved version of the methodical doubt. Observe the objects in your environment. Okay? There's bunches of them. Okay? Select an object for phenomenological analysis. Something small initially, like a pencil or a pen or a picture or something that you can just sit and look at. Bracket the object in your imagination and isolate it from all the other objects out there. You're going to just sort of, isolate this particular object, whatever it happens to be, a book. Okay? And you're going to focus on it exclusively and leave everything else outside of your field of experience. Withdraw your belief in this object's reality. So this is the new version of the doubt. Instead of saying I'm doubting it, because that was kind of confusing, what Husserl is saying, what we need to do is we need to remove our belief in the fact that this has an independent existence. Okay? In other words, suspend our belief that this has an independent existence as a physical object. Okay? And treat it like that, as if it were simply an item in your visual field and had no existence independent of your observation. Now remember what Berkeley said, to be is to be perceived. So Berkeley was close. He was very close. He anticipated this method based on Descartes, and he anticipated the method of phenomenological reduction. Okay? Husserl actually systematized it. This is called the epoche. This whole process is called the epoche, from the Greek epoche, which means suspension. So in this case, it's suspension of the belief, suspension of our belief in the fiction that this thing has an independent, concrete existence as a physical object. Now again, as with Descartes, this requires a little bit of training, a little bit of practice, because we believe that this thing is in fact, has an independent existence. All right? All of our belief systems point to the fact that this object has an independent existence. That in fact the tree does make a noise if I'm not there to hear it. That this book does exist if I'm not there to experience it. Okay? So we have to suspend all of those beliefs. We have to suspend every one of those things. And when we start to see them creep back into our experience of this one object that we bracketed, then we have to figure out why they're coming back. So it's almost like psychoanalysis, very close to a psychoanalytic technique. Because we're taking a look at how we process sense data. And to do that, we have to look at this thing as if it were nothing but sense data that doesn't refer to anything other than the data itself and the experience we're having of it. And so it's a meditation. It is it's a difficult meditation, very hard to do, because we have to suspend those core beliefs about the way that the world operates. And it is in that suspension that reality shines forth. Okay? Remember, we talked about all the way through, we've had this idea that philosophers, people who love wisdom, have to look at the world in a completely different way than they have been trained to look at it. Okay? We have to overcome, to use Nietzsche's term, our initial training in order to really find out what's absolutely going on. Because our initial training is going to lead us astray. Our initial instincts are going to lead us astray. Our initial intuitions about the way the world works are in fact false and will lead us to make false conclusions. And it is only by following this philosophical method that, or similar philosophical methods, they're all the same as you've seen, that we will be able to begin to put together the actual way that the thinking substance which we are interacts with physical objects, and other humans. Okay, does that make sense? I know it's hard to grasp. I know it's really, really hard to grasp. Okay? Those of you in the meditation class and those of you in the hypnosis class are working with this idea. You are suspending all of your normal belief systems, and you are in hypnosis, and then you're actually replacing those belief systems with new ones. Okay? And so as you see this process work, you begin to get the feel that, wow, my experience is organized by my beliefs. If I change my beliefs, my experience changes. Okay? And you all had that experience. You all had the experience as you grew up of altering your belief systems and having the universe itself reorganize itself. Okay? People have had, for example, you may have experienced a crisis of faith. Okay? That was a radical alteration in your belief systems. And it had serious implications for all of your behaviors and all of the psychological health that you had predicated upon your original belief system. When it collapsed, everything collapsed. Okay? This, or whatever that is out there, and we still don't know what it is out there, okay, is organized in certain patterns by our belief systems. That's what this is all about. These are the methods by which we can discover the relationship and how our belief systems change the way we organize our data, our sense data. Okay? Does that make it a little clearer? Yeah?
Can we go back to some very basic definitions of, like, the thinking substance?
The thinking substance is that which we are.
Right. Can I say I experience emotions, therefore I am? Is that
Yes,
still
exactly.
thinking substance?
Yes, thinking in this case, the cogito, the experiencing subject, the experiencing, whatever it is that is having that experience, okay, and it's not the avatar, it's not the body that's having that experience, it is the thinking substance that is having that experience, okay, through the organizational patterns of the body, of the avatar.
Okay, and then emotions, even when they're abstract versus sensory.
No such thing as an abstract emotion.
Wow.
All emotions are physically based. Okay?
So all the input to the thinking substance is physically based.
All emotions are here. They're on the side of the avatar. Okay?
And I can still say, I feel, therefore I am?
Yes, exactly, because you're still having the experiences of that avatar, your avatar, responding in an emotional way that is having a cascade of neurotransmitters in a certain pattern, and which elicits a certain pattern of behavior. Okay? You are experiencing your avatar going through that process. And your beliefs about that process will determine the actual experience. Okay? It is impossible, if you hooked two people up to all the electrodes that you wanted, EEG, EKG, the one that measures conductivity in the skin. Just lost the name for that. Anyway, hook them up to a lie detector, basically. Okay? And you sit in a room where you're not watching these two people. Okay? Or many people. All right? And half of the people that are being monitored are being terrified, and half of them are having sex. Your instruments would not be able to tell you which one was having which experience, because the physiological data is exactly the same. Increased respiration, increased heart rate, increased sweat, okay? So from your perspective, just looking at the actual physiological responses of the avatar, you can't tell whether they're running away from a tiger or having an intimate encounter. You can't do it. It's the person, the thinking substance which you are, which determines what's going on here, which is why the Marquis de Sade was able to write that there's no difference between violence and sex. Okay? Because when he actually got down to it, they're both the same thing, and they both have exactly the same physiological response. And you can, if you really want to, you can learn to have a sexual response when you're being beaten. Okay? So our friend the Marquis de Sade, who totally twisted but very brilliant, had this same, insight. Did that answer your question? We sort of got off on a tangent, but that's what I'm talking about. The thinking substance that we are is the one that determines all of this stuff. It is the one that organizes the experience, and it does so based on its beliefs. Okay, we do it based on our beliefs. The avatar does not. The avatar is just a collector of raw data. And then we provide all of the synthesizing of that raw data into the experience that we have. Okay? Which is why it is so difficult, which is why we run into these problems all the time as we're trying to describe reality.
Because everyone synthesizes differently?
Yes, well, and also because it's a subtle process. If we identify with the avatar, if we identify with the body, it's really hard to separate out the thinking substance which we are and the belief systems which we're using to organize the raw data that the avatar is providing and the avatar in its sense data. It's really hard to do that. Very hard to do that. That's why the ancients developed meditative techniques. Because there, in the quiet, silent, interior world, the separation can occur. And then it's an experiential data. You can actually have the experience of being separate from the avatar. And the further you get in the 8 meditative absorption, the further away from the avatar and its sense data you get, the more pure your experience of the thinking substance which you are. Okay? So that's where this all comes from, is that original meditative experience. This is just an updated version of it. Okay? And again, instead of separating ourselves from the avatar and its experiences, what the moderns are trying to do is say we can reach the same conclusions and have exactly the same meditative experience by concentrating on our relationship to all of this sense data out there, all of this stuff in the waking world. We don't have to meditate and separate. We can actually have exactly the same experience as the Buddha did, simply by running this epoche. Simply by bracketing the things and looking at them and figuring out how we interact, how this whole thing comes together. Okay? So for the ancients, it was the meditative technique. For the moderns, it is epoche and the suspension.
And that's true.
What?
And that's true?
What's true?
That you can have that same experience.
Absolutely. You'll have exactly the same experience. You will reach the same point of enlightenment. Remember that enlightenment, by our simple definition, is the experience, the knowledge that there are 2 substances. The thinking substance which you are, and all the rest of them. So we can come to the same conclusion here. By applying the phenomenological reduction, we come to exactly the same conclusion as we would if we spent 7 years in meditation. Exactly the same conclusion about the nature of reality, exactly the same conclusion about the 2 substances and their relationships. Okay? So either way, no matter which way we choose, no matter which path we follow, we're going to arrive at the same conclusion, and we're going to arrive at the same point. That's what all of this historical data is intended to demonstrate. There is only one path, okay, and it leads to this conclusion, no matter what. 2 substances and the complex interaction between them. No matter where we look. Okay? And so, again, Descartes' methodical skepticism will lead us there. The phenomenological reduction will lead us there. Meditation will lead us there. Okay? All of these things will lead us to exactly the same conclusion. And exactly put us at exactly the same point of enlightenment about the nature of the 2 substances and how we, the thinking substance which we are, is completely different from the avatar and the extended world. 2 totally different dimensions, basically. Which is why there's a lot of confusion. Which is why it's difficult to kind of describe things. Which is why the scientific method was developed by Francis Bacon and his followers in order to accommodate the fact that this is a complex kind of a situation based upon beliefs and probability, not upon firm, solid anything. The only thing we can firmly and solidly proclaim is the existence of the two substances, because that can be demonstrated. Beyond that, we're now in, because of the interaction, we are now in the realm of probability, which is what Kant was talking about. If the reason why we have this difficulty is because the thinking substance which we are does not have direct access to that. It does not have direct access to that. All of that is mediated through the nervous system of the avatar, which is why we are sort of stuck making hypotheses and running a series of experiments and trying to figure out the larger patterns, because we can't just go out there and look at it. We can't just go out there directly. We are relying upon second-hand intermediate data that's coming to us through here, that has been clouded and shadowed and shaped and organized by our beliefs, which adds a further complicating level. So we have to filter out all of those things. We have to first recognize that we're never going to get to whatever is out there, ever. It is forever beyond our understanding and reach, because it's mediated information. Whatever is out there, we will never know. What we know is the experience that we have through the avatar, and that's it. And that is, that doesn't provide us a lot of information. Okay? Doesn't provide us direct information about all of that. And that was Kant's brilliant addition to this dialogue. The fact that our knowledge is always going to be limited. Okay? Is that clearer? Okay? Kant set the limits to our understanding, and these are the methods by which we can then probe those limits. Try to push everything back, try to make more understanding of it, which is why it's taken us so long. Well, it's not really a long time. I mean, from the very beginning until the present is about, what, 80 generations is all. Okay? So we've made a lot of progress since the beginning. All right? But this is where we are at this point. And remember what Nietzsche said. We have to individually practice this kind of stuff because we are being continually manipulated and lied to. Not only do we have a difficulty because the real world out there, the external world, is forever beyond our reach, but we are being lied to about that real world out there. So there's a deliberate level of deception that is interposed between us and everything else as well. There's a deliberate ignorance that is imposed upon us. And we have to overcome that, overcome those obstacles, and become the overman, and essentially return to the divine realm. By our own merits, by our own actions, by our own efforts. Because it has to be done by us. My doing all of this stuff is not going to benefit you directly. Okay, likewise, your doing all of this stuff will not benefit me. Okay, I can go out and lift weights and run a marathon, and it's not going to have any effect on you guys. Okay, you have to go out and lift weights and run the marathon. So that's where we are. That's why we come back to the individual again. Because each one of us is, according to the Gnostics and all of these other people, a divine spark. And we just have to recognize that. Okay. Any other questions about that? Okay, we're still looking at the mystery. This is still the mystery. This is the mystery. This is the actual mystery in which we live. We have only... We'll get to that in a second. Okay? Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, scion of a wealthy family, one of the most wealthy families in Austria, billions and billions of dollars. He is a soldier in World War I, and so he sees, like Nietzsche saw in the Crimean War, he sees the absolute horror of humanity up close and personal, and it almost destroys him. So he comes back from the war after being captured and held prisoner for a little over a year, and is suicidal basically. He gives away all of his money, gives away his money, his inheritance to his brothers and sisters, and He goes and becomes an elementary teacher. Okay? This particular book here, the Tractatus, was written while he was a POW. All right? It was published in 1921 in German and then published almost immediately in 1922 in English because it had such an impact on the philosophical world. The translation was kind of poor back then. I've taken a look at it. It really is really poor. So mostly we do not refer to that one except historically. This is the one that we always use. It's the 1961 retranslation. Okay. It has an introduction by Bertrand Russell, who was one of Wittgenstein's colleagues at Cambridge University in London. And Wittgenstein really didn't approve of the introduction because he didn't think that Bertrand Russell was really understood what he was trying to say. But he allowed it to stand because they wouldn't publish it unless Russell's preface was in it. Okay. This describes a situation of logical atomism, okay, which is the logical and linguistic equivalent of physical atomism. He is saying that the nature of language, the structure of language, of a natural language, which we all have, is identical to the structure, the physical structure of that stuff out there, which is a mystery to us. In other words, language is a mirror of that. So even though that is forever beyond our direct understanding, language is not. And if we look at the structure of language, since it's a mirror of that, we can actually understand what that looks like if we take a look at what language looks like. So if there are atomic elements out there, we should find atomic elements in our language. And that's exactly what he tried to show here. That there are, in fact, atomic elements in any language, in any natural language, or in any formal language, like mathematics and COBOL and all these other things, Fortran, all of those things, which came later. But a natural language is what he's focusing on mostly. The structure of natural language will reveal to us the structure of that, and thereby reduce the mystery a little bit. Okay, so that's what he's looking at. Now, this is an Aristotelian idea. Logic was designed by Aristotle to do exactly the same thing. Take a look at the structure of Greek grammar, and you will get an insight into the way that the real world functions. Okay, so all Wittgenstein is doing is updating that idea and applying it to the modern world and using all of the stuff that's come since Aristotle to build upon. Okay? So he has the same objective as Fine and Husserl, but from a linguistic, logical perspective. And let me read you section. It's sort of outlined in paragraphs. There are 7 sections, 7 paragraphs with different subdivisions. So we'll take a look at 6.371. The whole modern conception of the world is founded on the illusion that the so-called laws of nature are the explanations of natural phenomena. So here in this proposition, he is referring back to everything that we've been looking at. Okay, Kant and everybody else, these are all just belief systems. We're talking about Feiner and all that other stuff. Hume, everybody. Okay, on the illusion that the so-called laws of nature, quote, are the explanations of natural phenomena. Thus, people today stop at the laws of nature, treating them as something inviolable, just as God and fate were treated in past ages. Remember that Descartes, in answer to the challenge, how do you know, if you're locked into this, solipsistic world of your own experience, how do you know you're not being deceived by some being who's providing you all of the sense data? And he said, I cannot be deceived because God will not let me be deceived. Then we take a look at Spinoza, and he's saying, there's no mind, there's no idealism out there, there's just this, and this is the mind of God. Okay? They're referring to this sort of transcendent kind of a thing, which also we cannot understand and cannot know, but it is the final answer to any questions we cannot answer directly. God, fate. So Wittgenstein is just pointing out, now we've replaced God and fate as the final answer to things we don't understand, because the inquiry stops there. If I point to God and say it's because God did it, the inquiry stops. Philosophy stops dead in its tracks. There's nowhere to go from there. All right? And in fact, both are right and both are wrong. Though the view of the ancients is clearer insofar as they have a clear and acknowledged terminus, while the modern systems try to make it look as if everything were explained. And that is the belief system, that is the false belief system in which we were raised. That science has explained everything and there's nothing left to explain. When in fact, all we've done is replace the non-explanation of God and fate with the non-explanation of physical laws. So again, we're still confronted with the mystery. The phenomenological method will confront us directly with the experiences, and we'll try to figure out what's beyond that, and through the relationship that we have and we encounter, as we analyze our relationship in the epoche. All right, Wittgenstein is saying we can do exactly the same thing by taking a look at the structure of language and how we think in language. Because if logic is a mirror of that stuff out there that we can't get directly to, then by looking at the structure of this mirror, we can actually understand a little bit more about what's going on out there. So now the method is linguistic meditation rather than phenomenological meditation or classical Buddhist meditation. But the effect is still the same. We're still trying to understand the mystery, and we're still confronted with the two substances. In this case, the thinking substance, which is now looking at its own linguistic patterns. In the phenomenological epoche, is the thinking substance looking at its own experiences. In the Buddhist tradition and the other ancient traditions, it is the thinking substance isolating itself out from sense data. Same result, different methods, same objective. All right. Now, we come to the existentialists. Any questions about what we talked about there? Let me stop right here and I'll change the page. So is this beginning to become a little clearer? Hi.